I have the honor of introducing Larry. I've known Larry just about a year through the Watershed Solutions Network, and Larry and I have instantly he sort of started to help me navigate a few really interesting both personal and professional issues that I was navigating right off the gate, right out of the gate of meeting him. He was just so gracious with his time, both to contribute intellectually and personally to some of the journeys that I'm on. So I'm really grateful, Larry, for our budding friendship and our roles together here in the Watershed Solutions Network. So I'm Jamie Ferro. I'm with a engineering consulting firm out of Raleigh, North Carolina, Hazen and Sawyer. I'm our West Region energy lead. And I'm from cohort one. I was the in the early days of the Watershed Solutions Network, and I'm now one of the regional connectors for Southern California. So if you're in the Southern California area, I'd love to chat with you about how we can network and get together and grow and learn from each other like we're doing today. I'll be reaching out on that later and separately. But before we jump in here, I want to introduce Larry. So personally, I shared a little bit about Larry with you, but Larry brings over 35 years of experience in our industry collectively. He's held several distinguished leadership roles in public service and research. Notably, notably I say to me, sounds notably, Larry was appointed by the governor to serve on the Los Angeles Regional Water Board, where he served from 2012 to 2022. Thank you for your service, Larry. He served as a director of the UC Cooperative Extension Office for Ventura County, where he established and directed the UC Hansen Agricultural Research and Education Center. Awesome programs. If you don't know much about that cooperative extension, it's one of the models for the state in my mind. He's worked with visionary leaders like Visa's Dee Hock and contributed to shaping national initiatives for food systems and organizational innovation. He's married, lovely family with two children and three grandchildren. And if you ever want to find Larry, head on down to the Ojai Farmers Market. He'll be there on Sunday working. So thank you, Larry, for joining us. Can't wait to hear from you about the food commons and how it can really serve as a new model for connecting people and food in their ecosystems. So as Alyssa mentioned, please feel free to put your name in the chat, where you're from, change your affiliation so we can see you on your four dots on the three dots on the bottom to rename yourself if you feel comfortable. I'll be sort of keeping chat tab on the chat, and we'll have time for question and answer at the end, a Q&A session. So Larry's going to give a brief presentation to get us all grounded on a shared understanding of this topic, and then we'll have a discussion, and I'll try my best to facilitate some of the discussion and questions that come up. So Joan is going to actually take a screenshot of us here today, of all of us before we get started and get sidetracked and digging in with our, scrunching up our eyes. So let's put on a happy face and a smile. And Joan, why don't you tell us when you want to take a picture and for the record here?
Does everybody mind if you're up for it? Turn on your camera right now, and I'll just do a very quick screenshot. So it's great. All right. Here we go. Ready? One, you big smiles. No. One, two, three. That work? Oh, great. Okay, one more. One, two, three. Great. Thank
All
you.
right, good. So as I mentioned, please, we'll wait for questions at the end, but as they're coming up in your mind while Larry's talking, write them in the chat. We're not going to lose them. It just so you can dump them off your mind. We can guide this discussion. But we will ask you to hold your questions till after Larry's done. So Larry,
Okay.
with
Jamie,
with no, yeah, over to
thank you
you.
very much for a very nice introduction. And all of you look terrific when we did that screenshot. And it's a pleasure to be with you on this hot Thursday afternoon. Anytime a group would come out to listen to an old retired guy for an hour, I think I really appreciate that. And I'm just grateful for this opportunity to share something that was a very exciting venture back in my past life. And I think that the food commons concept and so on is even more timely and relevant for today. I think when we started the venture, we were probably 20 years ahead of our time. But first, before I start, let me just say that much of what I've learned about systems thinking and organizational structures I learned from a year that I spent with D. Hawk. And that name may not ring a bell to any of you, but D. Hawk was responsible. He was the founder with a small group of people of Visa, that little tiny credit card company. And he put Visa together back in the late 60s. And then he became the first CEO for 15 years. And then he retired to a beautiful ranch just south of San Francisco near Pescadero and hung out for 10 years. And toward the end of that 10 years, there were people that knew of his organizational genius. More than a banker or a credit card person, he was really an organizational genius. And if you look at the way that Visa was originally structured, it was very innovative. So people were encouraging him to come out of retirement to share his concepts and ideas with the world. And I hooked up with him at that time and spent a year kind of like an intern or apprentice traveling all over the country with Dee as we worked with various organizations around the country. So that's where I cut my teeth on systems thinking and organizational theory and structures. And many of the concepts that I learned from Dee, we applied to the food commons model. So for the next 30 minutes or so, let me just tell you where I want to go. First, I'm going to talk about the problem that we were trying to solve, and then what we saw as a huge opportunity in trying to solve that problem. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory behind the concept, and then the purpose, vision, and principles of the food commons, and then go into the design elements and the challenges of setting up such a system. And then I'll go into what we actually achieved when we developed a prototype of the food commons in Fresno, and then to talk about some lessons learned having shut the doors on the food commons there in 2020. So that's the plan for the next 30 minutes or so. Next slide, please. So this really is the overarching question that we were dealing with. What would it take to bring to scale a nationwide regionalized food system? I mean, we were clearly ambitious at the time. This was, 2010, 2011. We were trying to create a model for a local regional food system that could be replicated everywhere. And then if once replicated in a lot of places, to be networked around the country, and thus creating a nationwide, a nationwide regional food system. Next slide, please. I know this is a lot of text here, but this is the problem that we were dealing with. And let me just state right up front here that the conventional global industrial food system that is the dominant food system today, in my opinion, and it's probably more than an opinion, is that it's just not sustainable. So the question is, if it's not sustainable, then what kind of food system would be more sustainable? So the problem we were dealing with, I'll just read it here. Though enormously productive by gross measures, the global industrial food industry's flaws are deep and systemic, with poor outcomes for humans, communities, and the environment, and a bleak outlook for future generations, current or future. And there were three major issues that we were dealing with as we were looking at this problem. One was of scale, another one was about ownership, and then the third about results and accountability. Next slide, please. And this is in general how we dealt with each of those issues in terms of scale, results, and ownership. And I'll get more into this as we go along here. But the food commons, what it does is it offered an alternative operating system to meet the soaring demand for local food and the need for a community-based generative economy. Next slide. This is the huge opportunity that we envisioned back in 2010, 2011 when we were putting this together. We At that time, the total food economy of this country was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion. And we thought, okay, if we had, if all of our wishes would come true, then maybe in a short period of time, 10 to 15 years, we could grow up local and regional food systems from the 1 to 3% that they were back when the economy was $1 trillion, grow it up to about 10% or $100 billion. And that the food commons would be such a successful model that it would take up 25% of that local regional food system overall, thus representing about a $25 billion opportunity. Those are the numbers back then, 15 years ago. The numbers are at least double what they were back then. And now I think we're dealing with a $2 trillion food economy plus. And so you can just double these numbers and think of, what a huge opportunity local and regional food systems represent. Next slide, please. Back when we were putting the concept together for the food commons, we ran across a study that was done by a guy by the name of Michael Schumann, who was an economist. And he put a small team together and looked at the area around Cleveland, Ohio. And he asked a very simple question, looking at the 16 county region around Cleveland. And the question was, what if this particular region was able to source 25% of its food from the region itself? What difference would that make? And he concluded, after doing a fairly exhaustive economic study, that 29,000 new jobs would be created, and the GDP of the region would increase by 3 to 4 billion. And really importantly, this money generated by a more local food system would stay local and circulate locally. Next slide, please. I should also mention that that 3% of the food that Americans eat is grown within 100 to 200 miles of where they live. Only 3%. So you can see what kind of opportunity it is if we could increase that from 3 to say 10%. Now, this particular quadrant diagram, I think, speaks volumes. In fact, I think there's probably 2 or 3 PhD theses in this particular quadrant diagram. And let me explain this to you, because this is kind of the theory behind the whole food commons. On the horizontal axis, that represents the scale of a farm operation, or the production end of the food system. So on the left-hand side of the horizontal axis, that's a very small farm. And on the other end, that's a very large production operation. The vertical axis is a product axis. And at the bottom of that axis, that indicates it's an undifferentiated, or what we would call commodity product. At the very top of that axis, it would be a highly differentiated product. So, for example, at the bottom, an undifferentiated product would be an apple, just simply an apple. That's all you know, it's an apple. At the high end of the differentiated product, you would know a lot of information about that particular apple. Maybe it's organic, maybe it's a Macintosh, maybe it was grown by, Uncle Joe 2 miles from, where you lived. And so on. You would have a lot more information about that particular product. So if you have this product vertical axis, and you have the size of production on the horizontal axis, the lower right-hand quadrant where it says mass commodity marketing, that's where the big boys hang out. That's where the big boys play. In other words, the large production operations that are producing commodity food, corn, soybeans, and so on. Commodities that then, go down the value chain and get processed into much higher value, food products. So that's where the big boys hang out. On the lower left-hand quadrant, that we call the economic death zone, that's where a lot of small farms used to be. In the 1930s in this country, we had over 7 million farms in the country. And it was a nice bell-shaped curve where many of the farms were kind of mid-sized family farms. Today, that curve is not bell-shaped. It's kind of like a double hump camel with the high end of the high end at the small end of the scale, and then dipping down and then going back up for larger operations. And so, in other words, the whole when you look at the structure of agriculture in this country, the whole middle has been hollowed out. We no longer have mid-scale anything, mid-scale farms, mid-scale processing plants, and so on. So down in that economic death zone, that's where a lot of small to medium-sized farms were. And what happened was they either moved up into the direct marketing quadrant and got involved in farmers markets and CSAs and that kind of thing, or they combined operations and moved over into the mass commodity market and played with the big boys. But the quadrant that we thought that there was tremendous opportunity was in the upper right-hand quadrant, where it says new opportunity. And the food commons represents playing around with differentiated food products, but on a larger scale. And the larger scale would come about simply by connecting a lot of the smaller and mid-scale operations. That's a lot. Okay, next slide. This is a nice picture that comes from the document, the concept plan that we put together back in 2011. And I just really like this quote, which says, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Written by Buckminster Fuller. And I don't know if you know anything about the Buckminster Fuller Foundation, but they used to have what they called the Challenge Award. And it was a $100,000 award that was given to a really innovative project that dealt with some of the world's most intractable problems. And in 2014, we applied for that particular award. There were over 350 entries from all over the world, and we were chosen as one of the finalists. I actually have a certificate here that I was going to hold up for you. But anyway, the Food Commons model was one of the finalists in the Buckminster Fuller Foundation Challenge Award back in 2014. Next slide. So what is the Food Commons? The Food Commons is an integrative whole systems approach to local regional food. And it marries the critical elements of real property, capital, and governance with value chain infrastructure components. And it couples new entrepreneurial structures of ownership with management and operations of the commons. And it is a new economic paradigm that's based on regeneration, natural wealth, and ecological limits. Anytime you deal with a whole system, especially a new economic system, you'd have to deal with the elements of land, labor, and capital. And that's what we were dealing with here in the Food Commons. The next slide, please. And this was our grandiose vision at the time, that we thought if we could get the Food Commons going, that it would be a major foundation of economic vitality and a magnet for a new generation of innovators. And that the system could revitalize and ensure the continuity of small and mid-sized farms that steward the land, et cetera, et cetera. And we also recognized at the time that trying to bring such a system into reality was a major entrepreneurial effort of unprecedented scale. But we thought, what the heck, let's go for it anyway. So that was our vision. Next slide. Over the course of about a year and a half, we pulled a lot of people together from around the country to help us think through this concept of the food commons. And we probably had upwards of 100 people or so. And as a result, in 2011, we produced this food commons document. It's really it's kind of the design architecture. It's our manifesto. It's a business plan. It's 90 pages. We try to spell everything out in this 2.0 document. And I can make this available to any of you that would care to look at it afterwards. Next slide, please. So these were the system components or the functions that we were looking at in the food commons, all the way from production down through waste management. So production, processing, distribution, retail, food service, and so on. We were trying to look at all of those functions and deal with all of them in this new local regional food system. Next slide, please. So if you just kind of ratchet down a little bit more into a regional food system, these are a number of elements, and this just represents a few of them. Some of the things that you actually have to think about. So it gets very complex very fast as you begin to design a whole new system. Next slide. These were the challenges that we were facing. One, how to create a holistic, integrative system in which all the parts would work together to serve the whole enterprise. Two, how to create a system that would be sustainable and regenerative for the long term. Three, how to create a system that would build community locally and regionally, adding to the common wealth. Four, how to ensure equity and fairness. And then how would such a system be governed? And then how would we create a model that could be replicated across the country, thus becoming a nationally networked system? And we realized that the conventional global industrial food system was not going to just go away, even though it's not sustainable. I mean, it may, who knows how long it may take to actually evolve to something much more sustainable. But our idea back then was to carve out a space in the total food economy for local and regional food systems. And as I showed you in the previous slide, if we could simply be 10% of the overall food economy. And we thought if we could do that, it would better balance the total system. Next slide, please. And just to show you how ambitious this was, if we were to create a mid-scale regional food system, these are some of the capital investments that we needed if we were to start from scratch. So just imagine the different parts of a food system, from the farms to a distribution hub to a meat processing plant to retail stores. Those are just some approximate numbers of what it might cost to actually start something from scratch. And the total was somewhere between 100 and 250 million dollars. And again, this is 15 years ago, so just double it for today. This gives you an indication of the scale that we were thinking about. And there's a lot of people that have asked me over the years, Larry, why can't we start a food commons here? Why can't we start small? Why can't we? And I would begin to show them these kind of numbers, and it would just simply scare people away. So unfortunately, you need a good size capital investment in order to really make a go of this. Next slide. So getting back to my mentor, Dee Hawk, who was all about creating new types of organizational structures in the world. Um, one of the steps in the process that he developed for creating new types of organizations was to clearly understand upfront what your principles are, to not only know what your purpose is with great clarity, but to know what your fundamental principles are. What are the values, under that are the foundation for such an organization? And the ones on the screen here are some that we articulated for the food commons: fairness, sustainability and stewardship, economic opportunity, food sovereignty, and so on. Next slide. And a few more.
Larry, you asked me for a 20-minute time check. Just letting you know. We're at 20.
Great.
Thank
We're
you.
doing good.
Yeah, we're doing great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Next slide, please. So in the DHOC model of creating organizations, this really is a big challenge. And that is, if you know what your underlying principles are, how do you then express those principles into the structure of the organization or the system itself? How do you allow the principles to become the DNA of the system? If you think about our Constitution, there are a lot of principles and values that are expressed in our Constitution. And our Constitution for the country, has spelled out a number of governmental structures that need to be put in place in order to make those principles come alive and express themselves. Unfortunately, I better not get into politics, but unfortunately, that Constitution of ours is being sorely challenged these days. But anyway, I just wanted to mention our Constitution as a good example of how principles are expressed in the structure of the system itself. Next slide. Okay, now we're getting down to the nuts and bolts. So in the food commons model, we felt there were three fundamental interlocking elements for the food commons system. The first big element down the red circle, the Food Commons Community Corporation. What we did was we created a for-profit corporation that would be vertically integrated and community owned. Go to the next slide, please. So these are all of the parts of a food system that would fall under our Food Commons Community Corporation, from farms to processing, distribution, wholesale, retail, and food service. So in this Food Commons Community Corporation, if you were working for the Food Commons, if you were an employee on a Food Commons farm, you would be an employee of the Food Commons Community Corporation. As if you were, let's say, a clerk in a retail store, you would also be an employee of the Food Commons Community Corporation. So the Community Corporation became the umbrella for-profit business entity that would encompass all of these different functions. Now, can you go back to the last slide? Yeah, thanks. So that's the Community Corporation. Then there's the Food Commons Trust. The purpose of the Food Commons Trust would be a nonprofit entity, and it would acquire and hold a lot of the assets that would be used by the Food Commons Community Corporation. And the trust would hold 51% of the assets of the corporation. The reason we did that was because we wanted the Food Commons Trust to have the controlling interest. The main purpose of the trust was to make sure that the entire enterprise stayed on true north and stayed true to the principles, going back to the principles that we articulated. It's very easy, for an enterprise to just in the beginning, talk about, principles, but then as they get actually involved in business and move down the line, they oftentimes would forget those. So the importance of the trust was to always keep the enterprise, on true north and say, we always have to remind ourselves that these are the principles that we subscribe to. And then the blue circle is the Food Commons Community Fund. We knew we were creating a new economic enterprise, and we wanted to finance and capitalize it differently than the traditional system. So we created this community fund as a way to finance the community corporation. We wanted the Food Commons to be community owned and also owned by the employees of the community corporation. So those are the three fundamental parts of the Food Commons system: the trust, the community fund, and the community corporation.
Larry, quick question. That's
Yes,
kind of a live question. Can people screenshot the slides, or would you at the end of the presentation be willing to share slides to people who share their email with you?
sure,
Okay.
absolutely. No problem. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So this is the path that we took in the development of the Food Commons. I put a concept team together in 2009 that came up with the kind of the initial framework for the Food Commons. In 2011, we published the paper that I showed you the cover of, the Food Commons 2.0 concept. And then we started to shop that around, and we got a lot of interest from various foundations. And so in 2012, we actually began to develop prototypes in 3 places: Fresno, Atlanta, and New Zealand. And we worked with those 3 places for maybe a couple of years, and then decided that this was such a huge undertaking that we probably should just focus our efforts in one place. So we focused on Fresno, and we continued to lay the foundation of a Food Commons between 2012 and 2015 in Fresno. It took us that long to break into the community, to lay the foundation, to get to know who a lot of the players were. We actually had the backing of the Fresno Business Council, the mayor of Fresno, and so on. But a lot of people in Fresno were very skeptical of this whole thing, thinking, oh, this is socialism, this is communism. And so we had a lot to overcome to get something started in Fresno, which is a very conservative community, if you know Fresno. But in 2015, we actually launched into business. And we started off with a CSA operation, a community supported agriculture, where people have subscriptions and they pick up their boxes once a week. We had 600 to 700 people that belonged to our CSA. We eventually got a 75-acre organic farm that we ran. We developed a commercial kitchen. We went into the wholesale business and so on. And in 2017, we initiated a DPO. DPO stands for direct public offering, different than an IPO, which most corporations do these days. The difference between a DPO and an IPO is that you can have small, unaccredited investors that can buy shares in an enterprise by using a DPO. It's not something that's used very often, and it's pretty innovative. We were trying to raise $5 million in that DPO to keep us going. And unfortunately, we were only able to raise about $400,000. So not enough capital to keep us growing. So in 2020, we unfortunately closed our Food Commons operations in Fresno. Next slide, please. So at the height of our prototype development in Fresno, this is what the Food Commons looked like. We had a 75-acre organic farm. We had 45 employees. We were doing about 3 million in annual revenue. We had between 600 and 700 CSA customers. We had 45 wholesale customers. We had a commercial kitchen, and we were supporting 7 to 9 food trucks. And over the course of the 7 years that we were in development, we had received $2.5 million in grant funds. So a lot of what kept the food commons afloat was grant money. And then, as I said, we raised about $400,000 in our direct public offering, which was far short of what we needed. Next slide. So, what were the lessons that we learned from trying to develop a prototype in Fresno? Well, we knew going into Fresno, given the very ambitious plans that we spelled out in our Food Commons 2.0 document, that we really needed about $5 million to kick things off. But we only got a fraction of that, but we decided to go ahead anyway, hoping to, raise the money as we moved along. But as I said, the DPO failed. And so we were undercapitalized the whole time. We were not lean enough. We were management heavy. What happened was we hired a number of people to get us started in Fresno, to build relationships, to develop partnerships, to educate the community about the concept. And as we actually got started into business, we kept a lot of those people on. And we should have really pared back at that time and developed a real lean, mean business operation. So we were too management heavy. The third thing, the lack of capacity for systems management. People really didn't understand the system that we were trying to put in place and didn't understand how to apply some of the principles that we were talking about. And we were just scrambling, trying to just stay in business. So we didn't have enough time to really, educate people about this whole new animal that we were trying to bring into reality. The fourth thing, we grew too fast. We had plans we knew we had to demonstrate the full system. So we were trying to develop all of the key elements of that system. And we had plans to build a retail store. We actually had a site picked out. We even had some rough architectural drawings developed. But when our DPO failed, we weren't able to go ahead with that. So, I think we were just trying to grow too fast, and without just going slower to really understand what we're doing. The next thing, lack of local leadership. We brought people in to kind of lead the food commons, and there was a lot of resentment from the local community about the fact that we did that and we didn't build, local leadership in Fresno to run the food commons. And I've already talked about the lack of local understanding and support. As I said, we were designing the food commons to be owned by the community, which meant a lot of people from Fresno would have to, buy shares in the food commons. And we were selling shares, I think at the time between $100 and $500 a share. So it was, relatively affordable, but it just didn't catch on in Fresno. And so when we did the DPO, we just didn't get any kind of investment from the citizens of Fresno itself. And then lastly, I just think now looking back, I think we were ahead of our time. Now there's, a lot more awareness about the necessity for regional food systems. And there's just a lot more resources that are available from government sources and so on to do something like a food commons. So maybe we're just ahead of ourselves. Next slide, please. So I'll end with this quote from D. Hawk. In times such as these, it is no failure to fall short of realizing all that we might dream. The failure is to fall short of dreaming all we might realize. So thank you, and it's your turn for questions, conversation. How do we do on the time?
That was wonderful, Larry. That was fantastic. You're right on schedule. So we have about 10 to 12 minutes for questions. There's a couple of them that have already shown up in the chat, but based on where we're at in the discussion and how we wrapped it up, let's open the floor. If you want to raise your hand, turn on your camera, don't turn on your camera, type it in the chat. Please feel free. Larry, that quote by D. Hawk at the end was beautiful. I mean, it's inspirational. The kind of work that we all do is often visionary, and it's not the first time I've heard someone say, "Gosh, we're just a little ahead of our time," right? Isn't it unfortunate how slow we are to adapt to change? And it reminds me of a quote that my mentor used to sign all of his emails with before he passed, and it said, "The future is already here. It just has not been widely distributed yet."
That's right.
So
I
we're
just
here.
heard Martha Guzman is in the room.
Martha's in the
Is this my
room.
Martha, or is this another Martha? Maybe it's another Martha. Anyway,
No, I think
okay.
this is your friend Martha. I think this is your friend Martha, Larry.
Sorry, I was getting some water.
It is my friend Martha. Oh my golly.
Hi,
So
Larry.
good to see you.
It's great to see you. I just saw Jim Cochran about a month ago. We were talking about it's, as you were saying, maybe it's time to reboot.
Maybe so. Before I end up on the compost pile, right? Anyway, Martha, it just blows me away to see you here. I'm just so glad to see you, and anyway, we got a lot of catching up to do, so hopefully we can connect afterwards.
That would be great.
So Larry, I have a question for you. You mentioned that maybe, you had a challenge with Fresno. I think, do you have are there other community characteristics in mind that could have, in hindsight, maybe been a better fit for either this piloting, right? You mentioned a couple of locations around the world, and Fresno was the one you zoomed in on. Any thoughts on that? If you had to do it all over again, what might be a characteristic of a location that might be a better fit for piloting this?
Well, you might be wondering, why in the heck do we choose Fresno? Because if any of you know Fresno and the Central Valley and so on, it's pretty conservative over there. And to do something as innovative as the Food Commons was like, really? But when we were shipping the Food Commons 2.0 document around, there was a person in Fresno. She was the head of the Fresno Business Council that saw the document. And she got very interested and invited us over. And we met with the executive committee of the Fresno Business Council, and they bought into it. It was amazing. And so that's why we settled on Fresno to begin with. But there are a number of other places that have really expressed strong interest back in the day anyway. Atlanta being one, Seattle another. When we worked on the 2.0 document, we actually had Los Angeles in mind. And I've always thought that Ventura County in particular could serve as the regional food shed for Los Angeles. And that we could create a really incredible regional food system that would pretty much, serve the 10 million people in the LA basin. But other places have been interested in this as well. But, as I've shown you, it's an ambitious concept, and you need a good amount of capital investment. And that always scares people away when I, kind of show them the numbers. And people wonder, well, why can't we start small? Why can't we just, start really small and then grow this up? And I guess I'm too impatient. That if you look around the country, there are so many what I call lemonade stands. Regenerative projects, sustainable ag projects, organic farming projects, even food system projects, and so on. But they're all small scale. And I just feel like we really need to, kick it up and try something on a larger scale if we really want to make a difference. So just waiting for someone like you folks to pick this up. Martha, I don't know what you're doing now, but you could easily pick this up and run with it.
Go for it, Martha. That's a challenge. This is great. Larry, we got a question for you from the early description of your of the problem statement. Julia asked, she said, noted that in her area, all the food grown, sold locally is sourced from a single seed company across the country. And we also need to localize our seed systems and consider seeds as part of the food commons. Do you consider seeds as part of that food system, and why or why not?
Well, that would be really nice if you could actually localize all of the inputs into the food system itself, including seed. Seed companies these days, well, they're not too many seed companies, but they're mega companies. They're huge. Largest, this goes back a number of years, but the largest seed company in the world was Simonis Seed. And they actually were a conglomerate of a bunch of smaller seed companies that they bought up. And Simonis Seed was bought out by Monsanto. Hmm. So I'm just indicating to you that when it comes to seed business, there's just a handful of major corporations in the world that control seeds. So to answer the question, I think it would be fabulous if local seeds were part of a local food system.
Yeah, great. Julia, I hope that answered your question. If you want to follow up on it, feel free to either raise your hand or chat one up for us. Another comment from Bill Tripp mentioned that they are doing something similar, but the nonprofit equivalent is the Karuk Tribe Department of Natural Resources. The community fund is at the Eco-Cultural Revitalization Fund at the Humboldt Area Foundation. The business venture portion is programmatic in nature, ranging from food sovereignty to workforce housing to revenue generated from fire response support. I'm not seeing a question. Last comment, they're far from sustainable, but can operate in perpetual deficit while covering funding shortfalls department-wide once the community fund grows to a certain point. 50 million can perpetually fund 2.25 million annually. So just some food for thought there.
Well, sounds like Bill knows the challenges.
Yeah. Yeah.
Give me a call, Bill, at some point, and we can talk about what you're doing. I'd love to hear more about it.
Larry, I thought I had a question for you as sort of moderator's prerogative. I'll ask a question different from one I put in the chat, which was more about statistics and your assumptions. But I've often thought maybe co-locating some of the food production facilities, farming. We hear about agrovoltaics, energy production and food production sort of co-located. And I think what you talked about feeding LA, my first thought was Oxnard when you started talking about this when I first read the 2.0. And I was thinking, what about are there other synergies that you had thought about co-locating some of these production distribution facilities, even the storefronts and commercial kitchens? Are there other co-locations that might make the business model more attractive to a wider range of investors and shareholders?
Yes. I think those are all wonderful possibilities. And to wrap energy into the equation, I think would be really a great idea.
Let's chew on it.
I think once you get a system built and in place, then you can just like Legos, you can just add on. And maybe in the beginning you could envision that type of co-location of enterprises. But I think all kinds of things are possible. Kind of once you get the basic system in place. And we thought in Fresno that we were going to design this system, and as I showed you, we were going to have a number of farms within the community corporation itself that would be owned by the trust. But then people often ask, well, what happens if I have a farm, could I still use the food commons system to push my product and that sort of thing without being a part of the food commons? And our answer was always yes. You know, that once we got that system in place, then others could use that system, you know, to do whatever they needed to do. So I think that's the important thing is to get the basics of a real functioning system in place and then build out from there.
That's great. And so building on that, so Ryan Flaherty, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Ryan, had a question regarding your lessons learned. Is there a threshold in terms of population and or willingness or ability to pay? And how might you weigh that against existing infrastructure or production capabilities, capacities?
Is there a threshold? Well, again, we were trying to create a mid-scale system because that's what's been hollowed out in this country, are mid-scale enterprises. And so, you know, if it's too small, then it just takes forever to build up. So I guess there's kind of a minimum size that you would need to think about in developing such a system. And as I said, you know, we felt we needed $5 million in the beginning to do what we needed to do. We only got a fraction of that. And that became a big problem for us. So I think you need something large enough so that it's significant in the beginning so that you can actually demonstrate a difference so that people can look at this thing and go, oh, I get it. I get that this is a system and I can see how that whole system works and is in place. If you just start off too small or with only one part of the system, then it's really hard for people to see the whole.
Absolutely. So Larry, thank you. This has been really great. Last question was, let's see, last question came from Ashley, asked if you had written up, Ashley Boron asked if you had written up any of your recommendations, lessons learned would be really valuable. Have you, besides that slide, have you put pen to paper on all of that?
Nope.
Well, good thing we recorded this session, huh?
I can tell you that when we shut the business down, it was a lot of headaches. And I certainly don't want to go through that again. But once we shut things down, we just kind of walked away from it. And there was one member of our national board, Jamie Harvey, that wrote a couple articles for some national publications about some of the lessons that we learned from the food commons. And I'll try to dig those out and send those to Alyssa, and she can share them with the group.
Wonderful. Thank you, Larry. So I just want to take this opportunity to close us out at 4 and thank you, everybody, and especially you, Larry, for providing your insight and some wisdom here to share with the group. Wonderful time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so next steps, you know, we'll send around the Food Commons 2.0 report for those who are interested. We'll follow up with some of these side discussions that I think we, you know, teed up here from the question and answer. And I'd invite everybody to look out for the next WSN network upcoming workshops. We've got Opportunities in Chaos with Felicia Marcus, Martha Guzman, and Rick Roberti on October 2nd. Just to give you a little teaser, I don't know, Martha, if you wanted to give a little teaser about it, but I'm happy to say a little blurb if you're more than welcome to. Okay. The workshop will cover opportunities to advance systems change in chaos. And, you know, given the significant challenges that we're having right now, reduced government funding opportunities, decreased agency capacity to support land and water stewardship, we'll try to tackle this topic of understanding what are those opportunities in this moment to advance systems change to make progress in restoring the health of our watersheds, our communities, and our culture. So we'll hear ideas and hopes of 3 of these very distinguished leaders in the space. I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you, everyone, for Martha for being willing to do that for us. And then in November, we've got leaders from the Upper Feather River and SoCal Watershed framework will share their thoughts on the value of exploring the watershed framework. And so we'll come up with that date to be announced soon. So with that, I want to say thank you again. Thank you, Alyssa and Joan, for setting this up and facilitating a wonderful discussion. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. So good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jamie,
everybody.
thanks, Larry. Thanks,
Thanks,
Alyssa.
Larry.
Take care.